Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in volume 11, which is titled The Realms of Existence. We're in chapters 101 through 110. The way that we do this program is I invite a student from Zoom to be able to read the chapter. After someone reads the chapter, I'll then share some teachings on that. And then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that anybody has, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. The way that you can ask questions is by putting those into the comment section of either Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. So is there anyone in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read this first chapter? Okay, looks like Yihang. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. The heavenly being's good destination. Monks, when a heavenly being is about to pass away from the company of heavenly beings, 5 things appear. His garlands wither, his clothes get soiled, sweat comes out of his armpits, a dullness descends on his body. He no longer excites in his own heavenly being seat. The heavenly beings, knowing from this that this heavenly being is about to pass away, encourage him with 3 sayings. Go from here, honorable sir, to a good destination. Having gone to a good destination, gain the gain that is good to gain. Having gained the gain that is good to gain, become well established. When this was said, a certain monk said to the perfectly enlightened one, "What, venerable sir, is the heavenly being's fate of going to a good destination? What is their fate of the gain that is good to gain? What is their fate of becoming well established?" The human state, monks, is the heavenly being's fate of going to a good destination. Having become a human being, acquiring conviction in the teachings and discipline taught by the Tathagata, this is the heavenly being's fate of the gain that is good to gain. When that conviction is settled within one, rooted, established, and strong, not to be destroyed by any Brahman or ascetic, heavenly being, Mara or Brahma, or anyone else in the world, this is the heavenly being's fate of becoming well established. When a heavenly being passes away from the company of heavenly beings through his lifespan's ending, 3 songs sound forth. The heavenly being's encouragement. Go from here, honorable sir, to a good destination, to companionship with human beings. On becoming a human being, acquire a conviction unsurpassed in the true teachings. That conviction of yours in the true teachings well taught should be settled, rooted, established, undestroyed as long as you live. Having abandoned bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, mental misconduct, and whatever else is flawed, having done with the body what's skillful, and much that is skillful with speech, having done what's skillful with the heart without limit, with no material gain, then having made much of the merit that's a ground for spontaneously arising in heaven through giving, establish other mortals in the true teachings and the holy life. With this sympathy, the heavenly beings, when they know a heavenly being is passing away, encourage him, come back, heavenly being, gain and gain. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here we have a discourse that helps you to be able to see that the human realm is the ideal place to exist and actually make your way to enlightenment. I've shared that at many times in all the different classes that you might have taken with me and heard me talk about that. But here you can see the words of the Buddha, that the ultimate goal of his path isn't to get to the heavenly realm, because the heavenly realm is not permanent, and those beings are still in the cycle of rebirth. They're going to be reborn over and over and over again until they actually get to enlightenment. And you'll see other discourses, I think the very next one coming up, where oftentimes heavenly beings are not reborn back into the heavenly realm or into the human realm. They're typically reborn into the hell realm, the animal realm, or the afflicted spirit realm because they're not actually actively practicing the teachings. They tend to be complacent because of only experiencing pleasant feelings. You can even see in this particular discourse how the lack of wisdom of these heavenly beings are saying, please come back again, come back again and again and again. They're encouraging this person or this being to come back to the heavenly realm because they're attached. They're holding on to this being, and they want him to come back or her to come back over and over and over again. So here, this is a great discourse to be able to help you see that the Buddha's ultimate goal for these teachings isn't to be reborn into the heavenly realm, because oftentimes people are taught that in various traditions, not just Buddhist traditions, but even in other traditions like Christianity or Muslim teachings or things like that. Being reborn into the heavenly realm isn't permanent, and you're still in the cycle of rebirth. There's still discontentedness, and more likely than not, when you're done in that life, you're going to be reborn into the lower realms, and now you need to work your way back up to the human realm. So essentially what this helps you to come to is to not allow this human life to go to waste, that it's unwise to be complacent, that it's very rare for a being to come into the human realm. And now that one is in the human realm, take every opportunity to be able to learn, grow, and develop to get to enlightenment. If you remember the discourse that the Buddha teaches about how rare it is to come into the human realm, he talks about how the earth is flooded with water, the entire earth, and there's a ring that's thrown onto the surface of the water, and it's being blown all around. And once every 100 years, a blind turtle comes up for a breath of air, and he says, how likely is it that this turtle will insert its neck into that ring? Well, of course, it's coming up once every 100 years. The entire surface of the earth is flooded. The turtle's blind, coming up to put its head in that ring. It's very, very rare. And he says that's how rare it is that one comes into the human realm. So not allowing conceit to take over the mind, but just understand that you're very fortunate to have this human life, and it's wise to not allow it to go to waste, being complacent, and each day just gradually make your way towards improvement in your conduct. Because by improving one's conduct, you're actually improving the condition of the mind. So oftentimes people focus on conduct because it's almost like rules and commandments, and they think that maybe some being is judging you to decide where you go after this life. But really, the reason why the Buddha talks about bodily, verbal, and mental conduct, because when your mind is polluted, you're going to tend to have unwise moral conduct. There's going to be bodily misconduct and there's going to be verbal misconduct because the mind is polluted. But if you clean up the mind and purify it through training it with the Eightfold Path and all the other teachings, that's where now the bodily conduct and the verbal conduct will be more wholesome. So abandoning bodily misconduct and verbal misconduct is to essentially clean up the mind, purify it, gain wisdom so that now you can implement wise decision making in terms of your bodily conduct and your verbal conduct. And this is what's going to lead to enlightenment. But if you fall short of that for any reason, there's potential for rebirth. And if you're going to be reborn, you would prefer to be reborn into the human realm because that's where you can actually have built-in motivation to make your way to enlightenment. Because in the human realm, we don't just experience pleasant feelings, we also experience painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. And we tend to be motivated by those to make our way to enlightenment because we don't like those painful feelings or the feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, we have a question from Chris here. Chris is asking, is it implied that heavenly beings who get reborn in the lower realms tend to act with misconduct? If they're in the heavenly realm functioning with misconduct, then that is more of a reason why they would be reborn into the lower realms. But I don't see that that's necessarily implied. And usually when you're studying the words of the Buddha, Chris, it's best to not try to imply anything, not to try to interpret or look for something that's not there. Instead, the way that a Buddhist speaks is they speak very clear, very concise, and they explain it exactly the way it is so that we don't have to figure it out. That way we can't be misled if we have a certain perception of what we think might be occurring, then the mind can cling to that. And it's better to just see what's going on here. But here, what the Buddha is talking about is he's talking about abandoning, this misconduct and being able to get to this better way of life. So he's saying, by getting to the human realm, and becoming a human, acquiring conviction unsurpassed in the true teachings. That conviction of yours in the true teachings, well taught, should be settled, rooted, and established, undestroyed as long as you live. So he's talking about once you get to the human realm, right? And now once you've gotten to the human realm, he says, having abandoned bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct, and whatever else is flawed, having done with the body what's skillful, and much that is skillful with speech, having done what's skillful with a heart without limit, with no material gain, then having made much of the merit that's a ground of spontaneous arising in heaven through giving, establish other mortals in the true teachings and holy life. So at this point, he's really talking about what's going on in the human realm, because that's what he's saying is the ideal birth, essentially. That's the good rebirth that he's talking about. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
David, I also just had a question about some of the wordings that I used here seems to be different from other teachings, like it uses fate and heart. What is the fate of a human being? And then there's also like having done what's skillful with the heart without limit. That's normally we don't see it in other teachings.
Yeah, you'll actually see in multiple places in the teachings of the Buddha where he actually uses the word heart, because the way that he uses it is he describes the mind essentially as residing inside the heart. This is why here in Thailand, when they talk about the mind, they will tend to touch the heart, where a Westerner will tend to point to the head. So even though you're thinking that this isn't very common, you actually will see it. The more that you read the teachings of the Buddha, you'll see this in multiple places. I didn't see where the word fate. Oh, here it is. What is their fate? Meaning, like, what is the future that they are going to experience? Fate typically is like a destiny or fate, but we can also use this word fate to be, what is the future?
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Don't see any other questions anywhere. Let me just check one more time. All right, I don't see anything. So now let's go to 102. Is there someone who would like to read this? Vibhav, you still have your hand up. Is that to read? Okay, sure. Go for it.
Beings are few who are reborn among heavenly beings or human beings because they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What do you think, monks? Which is more? The little bit of soil in my fingernails or the great earth? Venerable sir, the great earth is more. The little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is insignificant. Compared to the great earth, the little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not amount even to a fraction. So too, monks, those beings are few who, when they pass away as heavenly beings, are reborn among the heavenly beings. But those beings are more numerous who, when they pass away as heavenly beings, are reborn in hell, in the animal realm, in the realm of afflicted spirits. For what reason? Because, monks, they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand this is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand this is the elimination of discontentedness. And an effort should be made to understand this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. What do you think, monks? Which is more, the little bit of soil in my fingernail or the great earth? Venerable sir, the great earth is more. The little bit of soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is insignificant. Compared to the great earth, the little bit of the soil that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his fingernail is not calculable, does not bear comparison, does not amount even to a fraction. So too monks, those beings are few who, when they pass away as heavenly beings, are reborn among human beings. But those beings are more numerous who, when they pass away as heavenly beings, are reborn in hell, in the animal realm, in the realm of afflicted spirits. For what reason? Because monks, they have not seen the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of the discontentedness, the noble truth of the cause of discontentedness, the noble truth of the elimination of discontentedness, the noble truth of the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Therefore, monks, an effort should be made to understand. This is discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the cause of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the elimination of discontentedness. An effort should be made to understand. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So this is a discourse that helps you see, again, things that I've been sharing all along that you can now see in the words of the Buddha, that beings in the heavenly realm tend to be reborn into the lower realms, that's not a permanent existence in the heavenly realm, and they tend to not even be reborn into the human realm either. They tend to go down to hell, animal, or afflicted spirits. And the reason why is because they're not learning and practicing the teachings. They experience exclusively pleasant feelings and they tend to be complacent. And it's because they haven't learned the Four Noble Truths. That's the very first teaching of the path to enlightenment, where you can have this breakthrough to understanding the path to enlightenment. Without understanding the Four Noble Truths, you would never be able to make your way to enlightenment. Because how could you eliminate your discontent feelings if you didn't understand what was causing them? That's what the Four Noble Truths is helping you to understand in those four simple statements. So because beings in the heavenly realm aren't choosing to learn and practice where they can, they're able to, they have the ability to, but they choose not to. Because of that complacency, that's why they're being reborn into the lower realm. They're not actually purifying their mind. The same thing is true even here in the human realm. Even though I say that this is the ideal existence and this is where people can have built-in motivation to learn and practice, even in the human realm, people tend to be complacent. Like, look at the world around us. There's so many people that are just unaware of their own discontentedness and what's causing it, right? And then even people who are aware, sometimes they come to the temple and they learn the Four Noble Truths with me. They understand the Four Noble Truths and they still don't even practice the teachings. They still don't go forward to learn and practice. So even in the human realm with that built-in motivation, beings tend to be complacent. So now you can imagine in the heavenly realm, without those painful feelings or the neither painful nor pleasant, they're super complacent there. So here the Buddha is just helping you to be able to see that it's very rare for beings in the heavenly realm to be reborn into heaven or to be reborn into the human realm. So that's why you would like to apply determination, dedication, and diligence now in this life to be able to get to enlightenment. Not because you're scared of rebirth, not because you're worried about it or having any kind of stress or anxiety, but hey, let's get to this peaceful and joyful mental state so you can enjoy the rest of this life in that mental state. And then you don't need to keep wandering and roaming through this cycle of rebirth and continuing to experience it over and over and over again. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. So it looks like Tonka has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Teacher David, I'm a little bit surprised that someone could come to heavenly realm without not understanding the Four Noble Truths, which seem to be a basic teaching. So I always consider that heavenly realm would be a sign that someone already had those basic teachings implemented in their life.
Yeah, that's not true, because you can actually get into the heavenly realm through without even being in the jhanas or being in the jhanas or, even beyond that. Like, let's just say somebody has learned a certain amount of teachings. Like when I was growing up, I used this example last class. When I was growing up, my grandfather used to try to teach me not to hang, right? I'll quote that, hang at ice cream, because I used to always eat ice cream. And they had these big buckets of ice cream, literally buckets of ice cream in their freezer. And I used to eat ice cream all the time. And he used to tell me, like, don't hang at the ice cream. Essentially what he was saying is, eliminate your craving to this ice cream. But he didn't say those words because he didn't understand the teachings of the Buddha. But I was receiving some amount of guidance about reducing craving. And that's part of what I did with this guidance that he gave me without even realizing that that's what I was doing, without realizing and understanding the Four Noble Truths, without understanding the Eightfold Path or any of that stuff. I was starting to learn from him to restrain the mind without him even realizing. But he just knew that this was wise thing to do. So you can actually learn these kinds of things because these are the natural laws, and these natural laws are affecting you whether you're aware of it or not. And you can learn things like eliminating killing and stealing and sexual misconduct and lying and taking substances that cause heedlessness through many different mentors or teachers. And by choosing to practice those things, it's reducing the pollution of the mind, but someone might not know the Four Noble Truths. But even let's just say somebody does learn the Four Noble Truths in their human life, and let's just say they are reborn into the heavenly realm. Their mind isn't necessarily going to retain that 100% unless they choose to learn and practice in their next life. There's residual memories that move from one life to the next, but there isn't necessarily direct recall. So I know that I practiced these teachings in a previous life, or actually 2 previous lives, but I didn't have recall of the Four Noble Truths until like my mid-40s, right? So I was going all through life not fully understanding the Four Noble Truths, even though I practiced them in 2 previous lives. So even if someone does know the Four Noble Truths, being reborn into the heavenly realm doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily recall them unless they do some more work and effort to learn and practice the teachings to then allow those residual memories to bubble up and have more recall of the Four Noble Truths.
Okay, thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And if there is nobody else that wants to read the next chapter, I can do that.
Oh, perfect. Let me just see if there's any questions. I don't see anywhere else that there's questions. So yeah, let's go to this next one. Now we're moving out of the section about heavenly beings, and now discourse is related to the cycle of rebirth. Okay, so this is chapter 103.
The simile of an eon, first discourse. Venerable Sir, how long is an eon? An eon is long, monk. It's not easy to count it and say it is so many years, or so many hundreds of years, or so many thousands of years, or so many hundreds of thousands of years. Then is it possible to give a simile, Venerable Sir? It is possible, monk. The perfectly enlightened one said, suppose, monk, there was a great stone mountain, Joyana, 12 to 15 kilometers long, a Joyana wide, a Joyana high, without holes or crevices, and solid mass of rock. At the end of every 100 years, a man would stroke it once with a piece of Kasayan cloth. That great stone mountain might by this effort be worn away and eliminated, but the end would still not have come to an end. So long is an eon, monk, and of eon of such length we have wandered through so many eons, so many hundreds of eons, so many thousands of eons, so many hundreds of thousands of eons. For what reason? Because, monk, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of sure reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings toward all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you so much, Tonka. So here the Buddha is giving an analogy or a simile of the length of an eon, because during his lifetime, the highest number that they could count to was the 100th place. Or I'm sorry, the 100,000th place. So the word million and that number didn't exist during the lifetime of the Buddha. So anything beyond 999,999, they wouldn't have been able to count to because they didn't have access to that number. Where today we have million, billion, trillion, and well beyond that, where they didn't have those numbers back then. So they would refer to anything beyond the number that they could count to as an eon, an immeasurable amount of time, like just immeasurable amount of time that you can't even fathom. So these people were trying to gather some understanding of how long an eon is. So the Buddha gives this simile about this large stone mountain that's 12 kilometers long, 12 to 15 kilometers wide, high, and so forth. And now if a being were to stroke that once every 100 years with a piece of cloth, thus wearing away the mountain, he said, this mountain would be wear away and the eon would still exist, right? So that's how they were kind of able to wrap their mind around the understanding of how long an eon is. Then they go on and say, the Buddha explains how the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable, the beginning of it, because oftentimes what we do when we're looking for information about the world is we're trying to figure out in our existence now, how did all this start? How did this all happen? Where is the beginning of all of this? And there can actually be a craving in the mind, a longing, a yearning for that. There's plenty of people that research this and try to figure this out. And right now we think that the earth is around 4.5 billion years old. That's what our science is telling us. But we really, truly don't know. That's just kind of our best estimate now. And that's what the vast majority of scientists agree on. But there's some people who date it earlier, some people who date it later, of course, because of impermanence. But this is what people think in terms of the Earth. But then there's things beyond this Earth too, right? That it's not just the Earth. There's other planets, there's other galaxies and all these kinds of things that they wouldn't have known about during the lifetime of the Buddha. But the Buddha is essentially helping you to understand that the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable. So that way you don't long and yearn and crave to figure it out. And you can just understand, just let go. Whatever has happened in the past in terms of the beginning of the cycle of rebirth that has led to your existence right now in this moment, it doesn't really matter. Right now in this moment, you're a human being. The mind is discontent. It's unenlightened. It hasn't been purified. You're making your way to enlightenment, and focus on that. No need to worry or long and yearn about the beginning of all of this, because even if you knew, let's just say we knew, okay, the world started on this date at this time and it started in this way. Okay, that's fine. Well, it all comes back to right now in the present moment anyway, because your mind is needing to get to enlightenment. It needs to be purified. What happened long ago, none of us can actually independently verify a date or a method of how the world came to be. So just let it go and focus on what's important, which is right now getting to enlightenment. And that's what a discourse like this can help you with, is to understand, like, yeah, there's just no way for any of us to independently verify the beginning of the cycle of rebirth, including a Buddha. A Buddha can't independently verify that, so they don't teach what actually is the beginning of the cycle of rebirth. And then you can understand, just let this go. If the mind is somehow longing, yearning for what may or may not have happened, or how it happened, or when it happened, you can just let it go, focus on the present moment, training the mind, getting to enlightenment now in this life. So let me know what questions you guys have here. I can answer anything that you like if you like to put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. I see Yusuf is asking something here. A teacher. Okay, you're raising your hand as well. Go ahead, Yusuf.
I'm not sure if this question related, but it mentioned that the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. I am curious to know who created us. Mm-hmm. Because as far as I know, God is also impermanent. So who created that being and so forth and so on?
Yeah, who created God? That's an undiscoverable teaching as well. The Buddha doesn't call it as an undiscoverable teaching, but I know that it's undiscoverable how God was created. Just like the beginning of the cycle of rebirth, which, God is in the cycle of rebirth, but no longer, because this being is enlightened, but that is undiscoverable as the beginning of the cycle of rebirth. The Buddha gives a creation story in this book, volume 11. I think it's chapter 57 or 58. You can look and see for yourself. He talks about the creation story of how the world was created, but he doesn't talk about when. And then there's other places in his teachings where he talks about God as being the creator. But in his creation story, he doesn't mention God as being the creator. But there's other parts of his teachings where he does talk about God as the creator. But you shouldn't think about it as he created you specifically, right? It's not like that. Like God didn't specifically create Yusuf. It was your parents that came together that ended up coming together with an egg and a sperm, and then a consciousness came in to this being. So you can look at these other discourses to be able to see that information for yourself.
About the chapter, what was it again?
Volume 11, it's either chapter 57 or 58 that has the title is called On Knowledge of Beginnings. I think it's 57, but it could be 58 as well. And then the place where you'll find that the Buddha talks about God as being the creator, it's in also this same book, volume 11. If you pull up the PDF and you search the word creator, you'll come to a point where you'll see different discourses where he's talking about God as being the creator.
Okay. I also asked a question in chat if you would like to see that.
Yeah, I saw the question here. I was trying to understand it. What are you trying to say here?
Is it going to be more slow than usual?
It's up to you.
Like not slow?
You can read whatever pace that you'd like.
I can read what did you say?
You can read at whatever pace that you like. I don't have an expectation of what pace you should read.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if we have questions anywhere else. All right, Mayuli's asking a question on Facebook. Teacher, what is the lifespan of heavenly beings? Each heavenly being has a different lifespan. If you remember, the Buddha has subcategories for each aspect of heaven. He does this in hell as well. And depending on what subcategory of heaven you're born into, there's a set lifespan. Where human beings, we essentially live somewhere between, 80 to 100 years, sometimes shorter, sometimes longer, but we kind of live in that time frame. And it's based on the physical body that when the body no longer can support life, this being will die. And this body is going to experience the gamma of the decisions that we make. So for example, if we eat healthy, if we exercise, if our mind's quite peaceful and joyful, we practice loving kindness and generosity and things like this, we're going to tend to live a lot longer. Whereas if we're hostile and bitter and harsh and we make unwise decisions about our food intake and alcohol and drugs and unwise decisions about how we interact in the world, we're going to have a much shorter lifespan. So it's our gamma that determines our lifespan in this particular life as we're making decisions in this particular life. But for a heavenly being, it's still your gamma because you're being reborn into the heavenly realm in a specific subcategory of heaven. And now the Buddha assigns a certain length of lifespan for each one of those subcategories. So you can see, a couple of eons or 20 eons. I've seen as high, I think, as 500 eons for a particular type of heavenly being. And essentially, once they're born into that realm, when they get to the end of that time, it's like your life has expired and now the being is no longer in existence. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere else. So now we'll go to chapter 104, and it looks like Yusuf is volunteering to read that. So go ahead, sir.
Isn't that the same?
It's very similar. Let me just see here. This one is similar, just a little bit different discourse, so different simile.
Okay. A simile of an eon. Venerable sir, how long is an eon? An eon is long, monk. It is not easy to count it and say it is so many years, or so many hundreds of years, or so many thousands of years, or so many hundreds of thousands of years. Then, is it possible to give a simile, Venerable sir? It is possible, monk. The perfectly enlightened one said, suppose, monk, there was a city with iron walls, a yojana 12 to 15 kilometers long, a yojana wide, a yojana high, filled with mustard seed as dense as to a nut. At the end of every 100 years, a man would remove one mustard seed from the great heap of mustard seed might by that effort be the collected and eliminated, but the eon would still not have come to an end. So long is an eon, and of eons of such length, we have wandered through so many eons, so many hundreds of eons, so many thousands of eons, so many hundreds of thousands of eons. Because, monk, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, the unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monk, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So here we have a very similar discourse as the previous one, but the analogy is a bit different. Instead of rubbing the mountain with a cloth, it's that there's mustard seeds, which are very small, and they're in this box, essentially, a city with iron walls that's 12 to 15 kilometers wide, long, and high. And now at the end of 100 years, one mustard seed is taken out. And what the Buddha is saying is, okay, we'll be at the end of removing all of these mustard seeds, and the eon would still be going on. So helping you to be able to see this immeasurable amount of time. And the Buddha, once again, is talking about how the cycle of rebirth is undiscoverable. And he's talking about how that beings are roaming and wandering through the cycle of rebirth, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. And you can see this if you spend time around people who aren't on the path, even in the human realm. They're just kind of roaming and wandering around the world. They're not really having any real purpose, any real focus. They're not really working towards any goals or objectives. They're just kind of roaming and wandering. It's almost like the wind is blowing, right? And this is because the mind has that lack of wisdom, and it has this cravings where the mind is just being pulled in all these different directions based on the craving. And you might have even seen this in your own life prior to getting on the path to enlightenment. You might look back at your life and just seen how you were just kind of roaming and wandering around the world, right? Just the mind was unknowing of true reality, having this ignorance that the mind itself is causing these discontent feelings. We're just pursuing our craving after craving after craving after craving. So not only can we see it in other beings, but you can see it in your own life prior to getting on this path. And we can see that during that period of time that we just kept experiencing discontentedness over and over and over again. We're experiencing misery in certain disasters, right? So it's not only our previous lives that we've been doing this, but even in this life prior to really getting on the path. And the Buddha talks about swelling the cemetery because there's so many rebirths that we've experienced, just countless rebirths. And then ultimately, like I was saying in the previous chapter, that the Buddha is basically helping you to be able to understand, to focus on getting to enlightenment. He's saying, hey, this cycle of rebirth, the beginning of it is really undiscoverable, but we've been roaming and wandering through it for so very long, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. There's been tons of discontentedness, tons of misery and disaster. The cemetery is swelling, but instead, it's enough to experience fading away towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. What he's saying is that's enough. Instead of chasing after all your cravings and trying to please your mind through craving, desire, attachment, which is only temporary, and there's no permanent peace and permanent joy there. Instead, really focus on the development of the mind to get to enlightenment. That's what that last little paragraph or that last little sentence is there for. Because while all these things are true, that we've been roaming and wandering, now understanding that that's what we've been doing, focus on getting to enlightenment. That's what's actually going to lead to the ultimate peace and joy that you'll experience in this life. Looks like Yusuf has a question. If there's anyone else who has a question, let me know by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom.
Let's say that there were no Buddhas before Gautama. And as mentioned, we have been wandering in the cycle of rebirth for countless years, or eons of years. The first enlightened being was the Buddha, and all that time prior to him, no enlightened being existed in all realms?
This is the way I tend to think about it. Other people are going to have other perspectives. There's a conflict in the Pali Canon where there's places where it talks about that there were Buddhas prior to Gautama Buddha, but then there's a discourse where the Buddha says he's the discoverer, the declarer of the path to enlightenment, undeclared before him. So that means that he was the first Buddha. So this is one of the very few conflicts that I've ever seen in the Pali Canon. Whether there were Buddhas before Gautama Buddha or not, or whether there were enlightened beings before him, it's interesting to talk about. But again, this is one of those things, one of those questions that doesn't really matter, because ultimately we have his teachings now. Your mind is experiencing discontentedness, and you would like to be able to progress towards enlightenment, and that's what would be wise to focus on.
Would you advise to let go all these kinds of questions that does not help to eliminate this suffering, or fine, one can still ask? What do you advise, as David?
Yeah, there's no harm in asking the question, but oftentimes what you're going to get is this kind of answer that, we don't really truly know 100%. In my perspective, the Buddha was the first Buddha. He was the first enlightened being. But whether that's true or false, we don't really have a way to independently verify it today. And whether he was or wasn't, and whether there were other enlightened beings, it doesn't lead to your elimination of discontentedness. So if there's any craving or longing, yearning to know the answer to that question, that's what you would like to let go of. But if you have these sorts of questions, you're always welcome to ask. It's just that you're probably going to get this type of answer.
Was God enlightened after the Buddha's enlightenment?
I look at it as God was enlightened from essentially the beginning of his existence. That's the way I look at it. But again, we can't independently verify that. And whether it's true or false, it really doesn't matter. But that's the way that I look at it, because my interactions with this being is that it's extremely wise, with deep, deep, deep wisdom about this path. And I suspect that this being has been that way from the very beginning, because if God is the creator, this being would have needed to have a deep amount of wisdom to be able to create this world in the way that it has.
Okay.
All right. It looks like Tonka has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
I was wondering, Teacher David, about the last sentence, talking about strong feelings. From what I understand, strong feelings are conditioned feelings. And if there is no strong or conditioned feelings, then we experience a certain state of mind. Is there any other feelings but strong feelings? And what would those be? What would be example of a feeling that is not a strong feeling, if there is one?
Yeah, so the way that a Buddha will typically teach is they will talk in the extremes, because then that way you can see it very clearly. So he's talking about fading away of strong feelings, but by the time you get to enlightenment, there's also the elimination of even just a minor little annoyance or agitation, or, just even a little bit of ickiness in the mind has been eliminated through training of the mind. So here he's talking about it's enough to experience the fading away of strong feelings, enough to become free of them. But you'll even, by the time you get to enlightenment, have eliminated even the slightest little ickiness in the mind. There's not even the slightest little bit of annoyance or dislike towards other beings as well. So there's all these different emotions and feelings that an unenlightened being will experience. You might think of it like a spectrum of feelings and emotions, where someone can have really intense rage all the way down to just a minor little bit of an achiness. But all of that is eliminated by the time you get to enlightenment. That's the mind experience liberation, that it's completely liberated from all discontent feelings, all conditioned feelings.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Looks like Mayuli is asking, Sir, does all non-returners be reborn in the same subcategory of heaven, or depending on their Gama, they can be reborn in any of the subcategories? I suspect that they can be reborn in any of the subcategories. I don't think there's just one subcategory for non-returners. I think they can be reborn in any of those. But I haven't really seen that from the Buddha anywhere. But as we know, if the being is in that third stage of enlightenment as a non-returner, they will be reborn into the heavenly realm and they will get to enlightenment in that existence. But I haven't seen anywhere where the Buddha identifies a specific subcategory for non-returners, which leads me to think that a being can be reborn in any of those subcategories. So that would be my reply for that, Mayuli. Okay. I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now we go to chapter 105. Just someone who would like to read this? Okay, just looks like a bunch of people. I don't know if Vibhav has read yet today. I can't remember. Vibhav, did you read already today?
Yes, I did.
Oh, okay, so I'll go to Yihang then. And then on the next one, Vibhav will come to you.
Thank you, Teacher David. The cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. Venerable Sir, how many eons have elapsed and gone by? Monks, many eons has elapsed and gone by. It is not easy to count them and say they are so many eons, or so many hundreds of eons, or so many thousands of eons, or so many hundreds of thousands of eons. But is it possible to give a simile, Venerable Sir? It is possible, monks, the perfectly enlightened one said. Suppose, monks, there were 4 disciples here, each with a lifespan of 100 years, living 100 years, and each day they were each to remember 100,000 eons. There would still be eons not yet remembered by them when those 4 disciples, each with a lifespan of 100 years, living 100 years, would pass away at the end of 100 years. It is not easy to count them and say that they are so many eons, or so many hundreds of eons, or so many thousands of eons, or so many hundreds of thousands of eons. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering unhindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So this is very similar to what we've already been reading, just a different type of discourse. But what I would like to focus on here is down here. I don't know how many of you guys have actually read this, but down here in this particular chapter, one moment, I share in the words that I'm sharing with you guys how to confirm the cycle of rebirth. Because I've shared many times with students in various classes that there's no belief in the teachings of the Buddha. Even the cycle of rebirth and the 5 realms of existence can be independently verified. But oftentimes people don't know how to do that. They don't know how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth. And since they don't have that wisdom, they tend to either just believe in it, which would be unwise, or they tend to discount it and they think that it doesn't matter and that it is maybe not true, and they just kind of kick it to the side. But the Buddha taught these things for a reason. Every single thing a Buddha teaches, there's always a why behind it. So he's teaching the cycle of rebirth because this is actually what is occurring. There's 5 realms of existence. And if you didn't understand the cycle of rebirth and you started having interactions with beings in the hell realm or the afflicted spirit realm or the heavenly realm, and you didn't understand that that was the truth, it could really shake you up. You could think you're going crazy. Or if you started having vivid memories of a past life or multiple past lives and you didn't understand that that's what it was, again, it could really shake you up. But if you understand these things, your mind can be quite stable and steady in these situations and understanding that this is normal. So it's helpful to be able to understand the cycle of rebirth, because as you're lifting this pollution out of the mind, you could very easily have recall of past lives. You might see beings in one of these 5 realms, or you might even hear communication from them, because some beings can actually hear communication from beings of other realms. And if you didn't know that this was true, it could really shake you up. So you're never interested in believing anything whatsoever. But here in chapter 105 of volume 11, where a student will typically have been learning with me for about 2 years by the time that they get to this point, I share guidance to help you understand how to confirm the cycle of rebirth. And if you've read this, then you were able to learn it. And you can see here that I have 17 different ways for you to actually independently verify the cycle of rebirth. And if you've read this, if you have any questions on it, you can let me know. Because there's these 17 different ways that you can independently verify it. And it's a combination of all of these things that are going to help you to be able to independently verify it. It's not just one thing that's going to help you to do that, but a combination of multiple of these things. And right now, if somebody's believing that they only have one life, that's a belief and they don't have any evidence for that. It's just maybe that right now you don't recall your past lives. But if you start having these experiences, or you've had some of these experiences, or you can use some of these teachings to be able to help you to be able to see how to independently verify the cycle of rebirth, then you can do that, because you would like to ultimately do that on your journey to enlightenment so that you have 100% confidence in the cycle of rebirth. But when is the time for you to do that? That's a choice for you to make. It's here in volume 11, chapter 105 for a reason, because this is a point where students, if they've learned throughout the entire book series, that this is a good time to be able to start learning that. But if someone hasn't put together the Eightfold Path, they're not even meditating, they don't understand the 5 precepts, they're not understanding some of the other teachings, it doesn't make sense to just start going off and independently verifying this. You really need to spend some time getting your arms around the core and fundamental teachings first, getting that well underway. And then as you have more time to be able to look at other teachings, and maybe you've made your way through all those other books and volumes, that's the time to really focus on this. So if you guys have questions on this discourse, or if you have questions on confirming the cycle of rebirth and how to actually do that, feel free to ask any questions like that. You can put it into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Can you please define déjà vu from your perspective?
Sure. Deja vu is where you're having a certain experience now in this life, that the memories are bubbling up to the surface of the mind, and it's something that you're typically doing at the moment. And now when you're doing that particular thing, there's these memories that make it feel like, oh my goodness, I've done this thing before. But you know that it wasn't in this life because you know what you've done. You can actually go to a brand new place that you've never been to in this entire life. And when you show up to that place, it feels so utterly familiar to you. Or you could meet a certain person and they feel so utterly familiar to you, but you know you've never met them in this life before. So these are residual memories that are coming up to the surface of the mind. And it's called deja vu, that you're having memories that you know it's something that you haven't done in this life, but it feels so utterly familiar to you. So this is your residual memories from a previous life bubbling up in your mind.
Okay, so a week ago, I was texting someone on Messenger, and suddenly there was a deja vu that this thing has already happened. But I'm 21 years old, and internet has been there for let's say 30 years. So it's, as I see, impossible for me to experience such a thing in a past life, because there wasn't even internet or a phone to text someone or to type anything. If I were a human in a past life, and let's say that I was a human in a past life 30 years ago, let's just imagine that there would be no phone, no internet, no messenger. So how would this be possible? That what you say is true about deja vu?
Yeah, it might have been communication with this being, not necessarily the text messaging part of it, but just communication in general with this being. And it might have been spurred deja vu in your mind.
But what I had in memory as a deja vu, that this messenger thing, this texting, this stickers, all happen, not just like the communication itself, like this screen of the messenger, already I have seen it before.
Okay, well, I would suggest that what you do is you just keep in mind that this has occurred, continue to go through your life, and you might have other experiences that are, deeper or beyond just something like this. Because I can't confirm or deny that what you experienced is deja vu. You're the only one that experienced what you experienced. But what I'm describing to you is deja vu. And now as you age and you have more experiences beyond where you're at today, you might start having some of these other experiences that I'm describing, where you show up to a place where you know that you've been there before, but it wasn't in this life, and things of this nature.
Are you 100% sure that deja vu is a memory from a past life, or you just think that?
No, I know that it is for sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, just on small question on the deja vu part. Is all deja vu memories of past life or some?
Yeah, all deja vus, it's going to be memories from your past lives, because there's no other way for your mind to have that familiar experience if you haven't already experienced it. So it's going to be from a previous life. If it's from this life, then it's not deja vu. It's just a memory from this life.
Okay, because one example, like my daughter had a deja vu when we were in Canada and the Banff National Park a few weeks ago. And then she had this deja vu that it was not in the first day or anything, but it was like after a few days that she had some deja vu that she had been on one street before, on the same street at some other point. And so, given that Banff itself is not a very old town, how would you describe that kind of deja vu when the probably streets didn't even exist? That kind of street didn't even exist like 20 years ago.
Yeah, so that town might not have existed, but there was land there, right? So this individual, your daughter, can experience a memory of being in that same place, but it's not going to look the exact same. It's not going to be the same town, but being in that specific place.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so then the other questions, like just on past lives or like the cycle of rebirth, like what you described here, again, outside of the second one that you say you have profound memories and experiences, that seems to be the most direct way of verifying that there's rebirth. The other ones that you've described seems more like indirect way of saying that there could be rebirth. So how does one take this information of the indirect ways, like that you've described here, and then verify for themselves that, or convince themselves that this is actually experience of past life, because in some ways that you may be kind of believing based on what you've written here that this is because of past life. Say, it's like even like for deja vu, right? You could say that this you're believing deja vu is. I mean, I know you understand this and you are explaining this to us, but at this point, it's just more like believing that, okay, every deja vu for somebody who doesn't understand is all happening because of past lives, or even when observing how human beings who function, like people who exist in hell or other realms, you're just like making your not assumption, but you're kind of taking that idea and saying, okay, this might be because of past life, but there's no direct way from these other ways to say this is actually past life, right?
Okay, so the way that you do this is what I was saying at the beginning, where it's a totality of the evidence, right? So I put these two first because these are the most profound. And then this last one is also a way that is very profound, verifying dependent origination. So a lot of these other ones, when you start looking at having these first two and the last one, and then we put all these others together, then the totality of the evidence helps you to be able to see that there's a conclusion here, that there's the cycle of rebirth. Because it's not just one experience with deja vu and then now, okay, yeah, I see that there's the cycle of rebirth. An individual can have 10, 15 different experiences with deja vu in some situations. Then they can have the verification of all these other ones, and then also with dependent origination verifying that. So now you have the totality of the evidence to be able to help you see, like, wow, there's so much evidence here that there is the cycle of rebirth.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. Looks like Mayu Lee is asking, teacher, with certain tasks or activities, doing it for the first time comes easy. Is that an indication of having past memories? Oftentimes, yeah. So like if you I think I gave the example here. I can't remember 100%, but I think I do give the example of like a young child, right? Like a 6-year-old child who's never seen a piano a day in their life, but yet they go over to a piano and they can play masterful piano. This is the mind's residual memories from a past life. And you can have those kinds of things too, where you do something and it's just so simple and so easy for you because the mind has done this in the past. And again, it's not just this one thing that's going to convince you that there's the cycle of rebirth, but it's the totality of the evidence. You're never interested in believing these things, but if you put together and connect enough of these dots, you can see that the cycle of rebirth is 100% true. It's never going to be just one thing that you're going to be able to see something like the cycle of rebirth. You're going to need to have multiple touch points, multiple dots that you connect. And this can be one of them, Mayu Lee, that somebody experiences, or somebody that has these kinds of experiences where they have direct recall or something that is a skilled ability that would normally take a certain amount of time to build that skill or ability. Someone or yourself can do it, so easily, even though other people find that there's a certain development of the skill that's needed. So like, let's take an example of like the Buddha, right? So the Buddha, he was a prince destined to become a king. And he was, of course, in that life for 29 years. But then once he left out of that and he became enlightened over 6 years, he started becoming a teacher. Very different role, right? Very different way from the life of being a prince to being a teacher. There's completely different skills and abilities from being a prince to being a teacher. So I suspect, we don't know, but I suspect at some point during his previous lives, he must have done some type of teaching, because he wouldn't have been able to acquire those skills in such a short time frame to then actually be able to share the teachings in the way that he did, in such a profound way. So you can have people like this that are experiencing the memories from their previous lives that gives them the ability to do things in this life that typically would take a lot of time to acquire those skills. But now this individual can practice and be able to do those skills so easily and so readily. So yeah, exactly, Mayu Lee, that's one of the ways. Okay, I don't know, Vibhav, you have your hand up. Is that another question, or you're just volunteering to read your next one?
This one, next one.
Okay, let me check if we have any other questions anywhere. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now we'll go on to the next one. This is chapter 106. Again, a very similar discourse.
The cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. Master Gotama, how many eons have elapsed and gone by? Brahman, many eons have elapsed and gone by. It is not easy to count them and say there are so many eons, or so many hundreds of eons, or so many thousands of eons, or so many hundreds of thousands of eons. But is it possible to give assembly, Master Gotama? It is possible, Brahman, the perfectly enlightened one said. Suppose, Brahman, the grain of sand between the point where the river Ganges originates and the point where it enters the great ocean. It is not easy to count these and say there are so many grains of sand, or so many hundreds of grains, or so many thousands of grains, or so many hundreds of thousands of grains. Brahman, the eons that have elapsed and gone by are even more numerous than that. It is not easy to count them and say that there are so many eons, or so many hundreds of eons, or so many thousands of eons, or so many hundreds of thousands of eons. For what reason? Because, Brahmins, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. The first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, knowing unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, Brahmin, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated by them. Thank you. From them. Thank you.
Okay, so a very similar discourse as what we've been reading so far, just a different analogy. Do you guys have any questions on this? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So let's go to the next one. And it looks like Yusuf, are you volunteering to read this one or you have a question?
Beings roaming and wandering on through this beginningless cycle of rebirth. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and knowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. One person roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving, would leave behind a stack of bones, a heap of bones, a pile of bones as large as this mountain, Pipola. If there were someone to collect them, and what is collected would not perish, for what reason? Because monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and knowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings toward all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them. This is what the perfectly enlightened one said. Having said this, the fortunate one, the teacher, further said this: the heap of bones one person leaves behind with the passing of a single aeon would form a heap as high as a mountain, so said the great sage. This is declared to be as massive as the tall Vibola mountain, standing north of Vulture Peak in the Magadan mountain range. Would you like to go down? I think the internet is slow. But when one sees with correct wisdom the truths of the noble ones, its connectedness and its causes, and its cause, the elimination of discontentedness, and the noble eightfold path that leads to discontentedness calming, then that person, having wandered on for 7 more times at most, makes an end to discontentedness by destroying all the fetters.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So here we've got a very similar discourse as what we were reading before in this first part. And then the Buddha goes on to talk about essentially an individual who was a once returner, but then they come back and they actually get to enlightenment in a future rebirth. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So now we'll go to the next chapter. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, Tonka, go ahead, ma'am.
The long course in the cycle of rebirth. Sorry, I just lost the screen. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. Suppose, monks, a man would cut up whatever grass, sticks, branches, and foliage there are in this Jambudvipa, one of the great continents, and collect them together into a single heap. Having done so, he would put them down, saying for each one, "This is my mother, this is my mother's mother." The sequence of that man's mother and grandmothers would not come to the end, yet the grass, wood, branches, and foliage in this Jambudvipa would be used up and exhausted. For what reason? Because monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings toward all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Suppose, monks, a man would reduce his great earth to balls of clay the size of jibbubi kernels, 6 millimeters to quarter-inch long, and put them down, saying for each one, "This is my father, this is my father's father." The sequence of that man's fathers and grandfathers would not come to an end, yet this great earth would be used up and exhausted. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings toward all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings toward them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, Tonka. So you guys are getting a very clear picture here through all these discourses that the beginning of the cycle of rebirth is not discoverable, and the Buddha is talking about this long period of time where beings are just roaming and wandering. This is the countless rebirths that he's talking about. You're going to be getting some more vivid descriptions of how many countless rebirths that we've had through these future discourses that we're about to be studying here soon. So does anybody have any questions on this particular discourse? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go to this next one. Anybody would like to read this one? Let's see. Let me just check something here, because it's very similar to what we have been reading. And yeah, this one's not giving us any new information. So it's just another discourse with a different analogy. So maybe we can just skip over this one, right? Oh no, actually no, this is a different discourse. Sorry. Yes, would somebody like to read this one? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Not easy to find unrelated beings in this long course of the cycle of rebirth. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing the true reality, and fettered by craving. One person roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and throughout the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your father. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your brother. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your sister. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your son. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. It is enough to be liberated from them. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your daughter. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of being roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and throughout the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So before I mention about this discourse, let me just share something that I think you guys are probably familiar with. But when you see a discourse like this that has a repeating text over and over, there's the actual text itself. So you can see that it's repeating. And then ultimately, by the time you get going in the discourse, this ... is being used to basically substitute that bulk of text into here. So it's not that the Buddha stopped talking and truncated it like this, but for us to document it, we've truncated it in order to consolidate it and be able to approach it without having to constantly reread that repeated text. So that's what that ... is for, to help you insert the text from above down into here. So what he's sharing with you is that because you've been roaming and wandering for so many countless rebirths in the cycle of rebirth, that you've been related to essentially every being that you come in contact with. That every single being, whether it's a human or an animal or any other type of being, these beings have previously been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter, or some other relative. And where this is helpful for you is it helps you to cultivate loving kindness and compassion towards all beings and understand that you would be disinterested in causing harm to any of these beings. This will help you to permeate your loving kindness and your compassion to all beings around you and give you more motivation even to be able to use things like right intention, right speech, and right action when you're around individuals. That you're not interested in being bitter and harsh and hostile to that older woman behind the cashier at this restaurant that you're going to, because that's your grandmother, that's your mom, and you can think of it in that way. When you have a food server at a restaurant, this is your brother or your sister. Or you have a taxi driver, this is your uncle or your aunt or something like this. right? It's really helpful for you to think that way about the people around you, because the whole idea that people are strangers and you should avoid strangers and the strangers are danger and all of these kinds of things, that's just going to put a wall between you and other people. And now you're going to find yourself hindered from being able to interact with people in a loving and kind way. And you're not interested in continuing to cling to that perception. Instead, you would like to go out into the world and be comfortable to talk to anybody and everybody that you see and not have fear, not be scared, but instead have loving kindness and compassion for all beings. And a discourse like this can help you to essentially shift your thinking in your mind to look at everybody in the world as a relative. This is really, really helpful for your mind, because that's one of the things that you're doing on the path to enlightenment is, yes, you're purifying your mind of craving, anger, and ignorance and those 10 fetters, but you're also shifting your perspective, how you look out at the world, that you're cleaning up your mind instead of holding on and clinging to any certain perspectives that your mind has been conditioned to think as we were growing up. Maybe we were taught to avoid strangers. Maybe our parents told us that as a kid because they were attached to us and they were craving for us to always be safe, and they didn't want us talking to anybody other than them or family. So they might have said things to us that condition our mind to think of people as strangers, and they're going to be a danger if we talk to them. And if your mind continues to cling to that as a perspective that you have, now when you look out at the world, it can look like a very dangerous place. And you would like to get to the point where you don't have that, where you're not holding on to that type of thing. So if you read a discourse like this and you get in touch with it and you start practicing it and thinking about people around you as your relatives, this will be really helpful for you to break through any conditioning of the mind that you're holding on to where you're scared of strangers. You know, Vibhav, since you're on here, maybe we'll talk about this a little bit. When I was in California and we were going around to different stores and you saw how easily I was talking to people, you kind of commented like, gosh, when you talk to people, they just do things so easily and it's so, comfortable for them. You can see that in the way that a person practices, that if you transform your mind to think of that cashier at the UPS store as your sister, and now you just say, hey, would you mind giving us a price for the black and whites instead of a color price for the entire thing? You saw how we ended up saving, a bunch of money by that person just being like, sure, I can do that for you, because I talked to her like she was a sister instead of a stranger or, somebody who is like an adversary or an enemy. Just talk to her like a sister. And you can do that with the people around you. In fact, here in Thailand, when we go around, particularly here in Chiang Mai, when we speak Thai with people, we actually use the Thai equivalent to family members. So like when I go to the restaurants or a store, or when I have a taxi driver or something like this, I will refer to them as brother or sister, or uncle, or even mom or dad, or brothers and sisters and things like this, grandma and grandpa. We actually use the actual word, the same word that I use for my older brother and older sister here in Thailand. I will use the exact same word for waiters and waitresses here in Thailand, or taxi drivers. The same exact word and title that I use for our uncle here. I use that exact same phrase for people here in Thailand. So even though you might not go around and do that in the community that you live in, speaking in English, if your mind can at least think that way, now when you approach these conversations, you'll be able to do that in a much more loving and kind way, and you'll find that you're going to have so much more wholesome karma that way. And Vibhav can maybe share with you guys, if you're ever interested, what his experience was like when we were going around in California, a place that I had never spent time in. We were able to just go around and easily talk with people and easily find the things that we needed without any hostility or any adversity, because it was just so easy to talk with people, because they're our brothers and our sisters and our aunts and uncles and our grandmothers and things like this. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this particular chapter. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. All right, so maybe we'll go to this next chapter here, chapter 110. Is there anybody who would like to read this chapter? Okay, Vibhav. Oh, it looks like Rachel's volunteering. Let's go to Rachel.
The stream of tears. Monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, and fettered by craving. What do you think, monks, which is more, the stream of tears that you have shed as you roamed and wandered on through this long course, crying and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, this or the water in the four great oceans? As we understand the teachings taught by the perfectly enlightened one, Venerable Sir, the stream of tears that we have shed as we roamed and wandered through this long course, crying and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. Good, good, monks. It is good that you understand the teachings taught by me in such a way. The stream of tears that you have shed as you roamed and wandered through this long course, crying and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, this alone is more than the water in the four great oceans. For a long time, monks, you have experienced the death of a mother, as you have experienced this, crying and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable. The stream of tears that you have shed is more than the water in the four great oceans. For a long time, monks, you have experienced the death of a father, the death of a brother, the death of a sister, the death of a son, the death of a daughter, the loss of relatives, the loss of wealth, loss through illness. As you have experienced this, crying and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, the stream of tears that you have shed is more than the water in the four great oceans. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not identifiable of beings roaming and wandering on, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. For such a long time, monks, you have experienced discontentedness, misery, and disaster, and swelled the cemetery. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings toward all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So we know today that we consider there to be 5 oceans, where during the lifetime of the Buddha, they were aware of 4, right? So here he's talking about essentially all the water in the world, essentially is what he's talking about. And he's saying the tears that we've cried in our previous lives is more than all that water. And if you've ever done any scuba diving or you've ever spent any time on the water, there's a massive amount of water in the world. So he's explaining how you've had just countless rebirths, right? And now the reason why one is crying and shedding these tears is because we're united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable. This is what's going to cause discontentedness. That when you have agreeable objects and you have disagreeable objects, you're going to have craving to hold on to the agreeable, and you're going to want to push away the disagreeable. But when you're separated from the agreeable, when you're separated from those things that are causing pleasant feelings in the unenlightened mind, that's where the mind then moves to painful feelings. Right? And then if there's certain disagreeable things that you have contact with, if you're united with those and you have contact with those, that's where you're experiencing painful feelings as well. And that's where the tears will come up. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that you just had countless rebirths and that we've already done enough roaming and wandering where we've been separated from the agreeable and united with the disagreeable. It's time to get out of here, right? It's time to move on and get to the point where your mind's enlightened and you're going to have complete peace and complete joy and escape this constant rounds of rebirth. That oftentimes you need to see how tiring it is to be in the cycle of rebirth. It's just exhausting, but there's a better way. There's a way to escape all of this and lay down the burden of constantly having to experience rebirth and the difficulties and struggles of the unenlightened mind. And as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment, you'll see that life isn't difficult anymore, that there's no misery, there's no despair. But you need to be comfortable with training your mind and getting to the point where you eliminate this agreeable and disagreeable contact that the mind has. The only reason why the mind has agreeable and disagreeable contact is because of its craving, desires, attachments. When you train your mind to eradicate that, there's no longer agreeable and disagreeable contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body and the mind. It's just contact. That's all it is. It's not agreeable or disagreeable. It's like, all right, it's sunny outside. Sweet, let's go outside and have fun. Right? It's not agreeable or disagreeable. It's just that the fact that it's sunny. But we know that that sun is impermanent. So now when it's raining, it's like, all right, well, sweet, it's raining. It's going to clean up the streets and bring in some cool air, and the crops are going to get the water that it needs. Okay, sweet, it's raining. Right? It doesn't need to be agreeable or disagreeable. It just is what is. And all of this stuff is impermanent. Okay, your bank account balance is up here. Okay, sweet. That means I can use this money for some other things. Oh, the bank account balance is down here. Okay, well, maybe I need to conserve a little bit of my resources and maybe not spend as much. No need to be upset or frustrated about that. It's just that, okay, this change of the bank account is going to happen, and you would just like to make sure you have enough reserves to be able to take care of anything that you need to take care of. But we don't need to think of it as agreeable or disagreeable. It just is what is. Right? And it's just contact. That's all it is. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular discourse. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm just going to end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for reading. Thank you for your interest to learn. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for just participating by being here in our class. If you guys would like to attend next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, chapters 111 through 120. And it's going to be in volume 11. So if you'd like to read that by downloading it from our website, taking and go print it, getting printed versions on Amazon, or you can get them at our temple as well by just reimbursing us for the printing costs. That way you'll be prepared to be able to study those for our next class. Tomorrow in the group learning program, I'm going to be in chapter 8 of volume 1, which is the 3 poisons. I'm going to teach how to transform the mind away from these. I'm going to explain what they are, how they're affecting the mind, and what the solutions are for them. So if you need to learn that, you're more than welcome to attend that class. It's going to be at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. tomorrow on Sunday. And of course, we do meditation prior to that class as well. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation and opening up to any and all questions the students have. We just finished up our 4-part series of Buddhist chanting in the group learning program. So now we're just going to be rotating each week between breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation. So thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee-ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.